All right. All right. Good day. Good day to you guys. Today is a topic concerning about love and the law. And for some reason, this morning I just sort of um, decided to start reading. Actually, this morning I was kind of exploring. Like, I wanted to explore hand symbols in the Bible and so on. And what does this um, mean per se? But what I've discovered was that I started stumbling upon Romans in the Bible. And Romans, I think, might become one of my favorite chapters in the Bible just because it exemplifies um, what psychoanalysis has already sort of uncovered. Um, and I believe it's like Romans like six, like from like six to like 12, everything is like gold essentially. But in Romans 7, there's this chapter. It kind of gets divided. It's like, depends what version of the Bible, of course. But it's called, this little section is called like law and sin. Um, because I think it's in Romans 6 or the early beginning of Romans 7, where Paul is sort of talking about like that the law, um, like sin did not exist basically outside the law. you know, like he basically says like sin became alive like once the law was uh, became an injunction. Um, and you can kind of get this understanding is right here, right? Romans is like Romans 7:7. It's like, what shall we say then? Is the law sinful? He says, certainly not. Nevertheless, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. For I would have not known what coveting really was if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, produced in me every kind of coveting. For apart from the law, sin was dead. Once I was alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin sprang to life and I died. I found that the very commandment that was intended to bring life actually brought death. For sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. So then the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, righteous and good. This is this is hilarious. It's such an ironic thing where it's like Paul is basically saying this kind of notion. At least I think it's Paul. Paul is saying this notion of like, oh yeah, basically, I didn't know what sin was until I tried to not do it. Right? And it's in this understanding of when you try to not do it that you understand what sin is. Um, and that you are sort of helpless in your own agency to not do it. And there's this whole other verse, which I wish I could find it now. I'm pretty sure I could find it, but I didn't have it prepared. But anyways, there's this whole verse in Romans that talks about how um, even if you desired to do good, you end up doing what you don't want to do, right? And to me, this verse kind of really encapsulates the unconscious and in its repetition, in its sort of fullness, where it's like, as much as I want to do good, I still end up doing the thing I don't want to do. Um, so you can see here that only in the law you have an understanding of your own agency, and you have an understanding of where that agency resides, which once the law is in place, you understand your own agency in the sense of like you have basically no real agency. You are, so to speak, subject a subject. You are subjected to the sentence. Um, anyways, and throughout Romans, like I think like from 7, 8, 12, it talks about how like the only way to fulfill the law. And so remember, like the law has been placed, um, and you can't, as much as we desire to fulfill the law on our own, we can't do it. And so I think like roughly around, let me pull it up real quick. Roughly around, roughly around like Romans 13. It's like around 8, like Romans 13:8. It says right here, love is the fulfillment of the law, right? And then it talks like before that, it talks about how like God needed, like there needed to be a sort of a lack of this impossibility. There needed to be this impossibility of fulfilling the law in order for mercy and grace to actually be fulfilled, right? So God could forgive, and God could give grace, and God could give His mercy, right? So in this way, like the law needed to be impossible to fulfill, right? So that's really like the whole point. Like the law is supposed to be impossible to fulfill, and it's supposed to be to where you can't do it, right? You know, you can't do it. The law, the commandments is supposed to be impossible to fulfill. But what's ironic about Romans 13 is that then they say something like, well, love fulfills the law, right? But I want to tie in Lacan real quick, because I think this is going to be really important to all the connections I'm going to make with love, the law, and everything else. So Lacan famously says something like, you know, love is what you cannot give, and then the other doesn't want it, right? But to really simplify the term or his statement, you can just put it like this: love is accepting one's lack. Like love is when you love them for what they are not. When you love them for what they cannot give, right? So it's this acceptance of the lack. Okay, so now that we understand Lacan's kind of notion of love in a very simplified manner, because unfortunately we have to do it that way, at least for this talk, let's go back to that verse, that understanding of love as the fulfillment of the law. Okay, because this is going to be really important actually. So what's going to be important about this, when it's the fulfillment of the law, understand the irony of the context in which it is set in before. Okay, so watch this. So Romans 13:8, it says here, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is a fulfillment of the law. Okay, so I think on the net, Daniel Gardner and I think a couple other people, we talked about how there's sort of like this radical misunderstanding with the concept of like love your neighbor. But remember, the context of Romans talks about how the law is impossible to fulfill. Like you can't do it, okay? But then it says, oh, only love can fulfill the law. How is that so? And how do we make sense of these injunctions? And then how does all those injunctions, like don't covet, don't commit murder, how does that all make sense into that summed up little sentence of love your neighbor as yourself? Okay, so I think Lacan also does a famous reading on this where he goes, what's ironic about love your neighbor is that as yourself is that people actually, the way they love is is in a form of hate. It's the way I love you is the way I hate myself. So in this case, that's how we treat each other. But if you take Lacan's notion of love, then you understand that it's loving each other for what we are not, loving each other for what we lack. And it's only when we love each other for what we lack that we fulfill the law. Okay, so here's the irony, right? Here's the whole irony of the whole like Romans 13, like you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder. It can be all summed up as love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. So what does it mean to love yourself? This is the part that's tricky, but psychoanalysis can help us. To love your neighbor as yourself, which is an ironic statement, because the neighbor is not you, right? It's a not you. But how do you love your neighbor as yourself? So let's translate the neighbor as not you, and then let's translate the you as not you. So to love your neighbor, not you, as yourself, not you. And in this, you can realize that the not you, which is you, is lacking. So we already talked about how it's impossible to fulfill the law. So that means loving the neighbor as yourself means loving the person that cannot fulfill the law fulfills the law. That's the irony. That's the whole ironic twist of the whole thing. Of loving your neighbor as yourself is loving what they cannot be, loving them for not being able to fulfill the law. And when you love them for not being able to fulfill the law, you end up fulfilling the law. And that's why, in my opinion, it ends with, it starts with these injunctions like, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, but it can all be summed up with love your neighbor as yourself. That means loving the person, the other, as yourself being that which knows cannot fulfill the law, that which knows cannot actually satisfy it. Right? So this goes back to Lacan's thing again, which love is what one cannot give, which one does not have. Then you understand that this is the this is the fulfillment of the law. And so this is like the ironic part, I think, where some people could hear this, and I know my more philosophically minded people, they would get this, they would understand this, but for those that are more like heavy theologically centered, they may be like, well, does that mean like I just don't do it, like I don't try? No, it doesn't mean that you continue to like covet or you continue to like do whatever. It's this sort of ironic thing where it's like, I do this even though I know it's going to fail. Right? It's like I do this thing and because I know I cannot do it. It's kind of like, when we talk about like atheists like talking about this, right? This sort of ironic thing where it's like the abandonment of not eating pork, right? Like don't eat pork, like that for an atheist doesn't make any sense, right? Like to somehow ban a specific animal and say don't eat this, and then we try to rationalize it and be like, oh, pigs are dirty and that's why we shouldn't eat it, and so on. But actually, this is what's funny about what I love about an irrational kind of commandment like don't eat pork. Especially like in our own society, it's like it's like when somebody might say, well, that you can't help but eat pork, but you still choose to not eat pork, right? And the person should respond like, yes, precisely, I do it because precisely I know I cannot do it. And so that's what I would enjoy, and I would I guess encourage those of anybody interested in like religion of joining anything, really. Any injunction, like the practice of doing any injunction, is to know that you cannot do it. Like to me, that is like the whole point. Like I am trying to fast, I am trying to do this, and no matter how much I try, I know I cannot do it. Like there's that part where like it fails. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that idea. Um, and so it's not free reign to just do evil per se, but it's this understanding of, it's kind of like this ironic Einsteinian quote, right? Where it's like, oh, the repetition of something is insanity, like as much as you try and it keeps failing. But in this case, it actually works. Where it's like, yes, I'm doing it because I know I cannot do it. Which means that our real agency doesn't reside in the what the law uh, injunctions, what the law imposes upon us. That is not our agency. That is not, so our choosing to follow the law isn't our real choice, because every time we try to do it, we fail. We can't fulfill it. And then so when we go back to Romans and it talks about how love fulfills the law, what this means is that love is the only real choice in the face of the law, which means that when the person fails to follow the law, what is revealed as a real choice is love. Love is that which I do not have. Why is love something in which I do not have? Why? Because love is ultimately a choice. And this goes back to Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard in his like spiritual writings, I mean, the common trope of God, right, is God is love, right? But Kierkegaard goes a little step further by talking about how, like, the whole point of being human is to make a choice. And he says that without God, we wouldn't be able to make a choice. But if God is love, that means that love is the choice, right? And Kierkegaard talks about, it's a shame that you wouldn't choose God, because without God, you wouldn't have a choice in the first place. So it's like picking a kind of like you're shorting yourself, basically. The fact that you can choose between two, God is already immanent in the choice itself. So he's like, even if you could choose the worst part, the bad part, he's like, without God, you wouldn't have been able to choose that. So God is already immanent within the choice before the two is even presented. And then yet, ironically, for Kierkegaard, God still presents himself as a choice against the world and so on. But again, it's meant to show this irony, and we can abstract God away and put love in there. If we, a lot of Christians like to identify God synonymously with love. So that means love is the choice. And that's why love is the only thing that cannot be offered, because it is a choice. And it is something that we have to constantly toil with and choose over and over again, because it is not something that I have. And it's not something that I can offer you. And it's even something like Lacan would say, it's even something that the other doesn't want. So in this case, love is the only real choice. And when love becomes the only real choice for our agency, then we fulfill the law, right? So in the midst of failing the law, just to summarize, in the impossibility of satisfying the law, to love your neighbor as yourself is to know that the other is also somebody that cannot fulfill the law, that will fail at the injunctions at all times, and that in the midst of this failing, you still choose to love them. And when you choose to love them, you fulfill the law. Only in that case is that fulfilled. Only in that case is it a real choice. Only in that case is there anything of real agency. I don't think it's a coincidence that in philosophical terms, we like to talk about ourselves as subjects, that the moment there is a law, we are subject to the law. And as a speaking subject, we are a subject of the sentence. We are the sentence subjects the subject, right? We are the subject subjected to the sentence. We have been decreed. Um, and it is ironic that the law as the sentence, the sentencing, which creates the subject, when the subject cannot fulfill the sentence, we have committed a crime. But it's in that impossibility, knowing that we will ultimately commit the crime. And what do you do with the one that commits the crime? What is the only choice that you are faced with? It seems like, uh, Romans and Paul and all them and Kierkegaard seems that to say that love is that choice. So, but even stripping this theologically away, you can understand that when it comes to others, just like in our daily lives, just like our friends, and so on. This is why dating is such an interesting like temptation, you could say. This actually has been my work on phenomenology of dating, where I say that the ground of dating is not love. Believe it or not, it's not love. This is a completely like it's a complete misnomer to understand that, yes, I'm dating to find love. No, 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 no. To date is to be on the ground of temptation. Why is it to be on the ground of temptation? I go through this big exposition about how, if you cut the word date, it means fruit. And so date is an actual fruit as well. And so you're tempted by the fruit. You're tempted by what is offered. So, right? And remember, love is the one thing that cannot be offered, right? And if you go back to Adam and Eve, the tree is the one thing that is not offered. Really. There's the fruit, but the tree of good and evil is actually the one thing that's not offered. So you get to understand that through this, the fruit is the reason why the fruit is a temptation is because it's the one thing that's offered. And so if we connect the fruit and the date has fruit, fruit has date, we understand that there is a real thing such as a date that is a fruit. To date is to be on the ground of temptation, to be tempted by what is offered. But in dating, you have to kind of go through this deception. You have to go through this kind of innate failure that will occur, where finally you realize that love is the one thing that cannot be offered. And when love is the one thing that cannot be offered, that is when you're on the ground of love. That is when you're on that ground and you're no longer dating per se. You're not loving the person for what they are, but you are loving them for who they are. And loving them, and just to be very fair, loving them for who they are is not by what they think they are. It's by what they are not. It is by what they fail to be in the midst of the injunction, right? In the midst of, babe, did you do the dishes? No, I did not. Okay. Do you still love her? Okay. And so on. And it's not like, me doing the dishes or me not doing the dishes necessarily show love, but it's like me trying to do the dishes and failing. And what happens then, right? So we can understand this failure as what leads us to kind of the radical acceptance of the other. And only then, through that failure, can we really accept the other as other. And so that's why it finally transitions from dating to love. But dating is never on the ground of love. Dating has to go through the temptation of what is offered, which is why in dating, people have the same language, like, oh yeah, I just want a man that's like this, right? They are consumed, infatuated by what is offered. Like, what are you offering me? But actually love, like Zizek says, love is the one thing that is not about satisfying needs, right? Love emerges when that failure of what cannot be offered is there. um, so, but anyways, I think that's really it. But yeah, all right, guys, take care. And thanks, Green. Thanks, Will. Nice to see you. All right, guys, take care. Bye.